Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Our today's discussion is about Hegel. Hegel's period was 17th 70 to 18th 31st. He was most important, most popular German idealist thinker. Hegel was a complex thinker who dominated the German philosophy in the 19th century and influenced Western thought for generations. He is also considered as the most difficult of all major thinkers to read. He was a popular idealist thinker in Western political philosophy. Hegel was greatly inspired by Greek philosophy, so he greatly admired Greek philosophers and Greek city-state and their contributions to Western civilization. Hegel received a degree of Doctor of Philosophy in 1790 and a certificate in theology in 1793. Despite a continuing interest in theology, Hegel devoted of his time in school to a study of classics. He also worked as a private tutor until 1797 in Bern. His studies and writings at his time were in the field of theology. In 1797, Hegel left Bern and went to Frankfurt, where he continued working as a tutor. Hegel left his tutorship and went to Jena to study and to prepare himself for a professorship. He received his appointment from the University of Jena in 1805. In 1808, he accepted a professorship at the University of Nuremberg, where he remained 1816. Then he moved in the same year to the University of Heidelberg and taught for 2 years. He also accepted the chair of philosophy at the University of Berlin. Here he remained until his death in 1831. Hegel had published his many famous writings, but his first and most important work was The Phenomenology of the Spirit in 1807, which outlined the evolution of human consciousness. It became the foundation of his whole vast system of thought. The Science of Logic was his next second most important writing. The Science of Logic divided into 3 volumes from 1812 to 1816. His next most important writing was the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences. The Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, considered as texts for his lectures and remained very important. The Philosophy of Right and Law, his next most important contribution in 1821. Next most important writing of Hegel was the Philosophy of History. The Philosophy of History consisted series of lectures given from Hegel during 1822 to 1831. Overall, if we examine his writings and his contributions, then we find out that due to his writings, his fame and influence rapidly increased in German universities. He achieved a great success, fame, and good reputation because of his work and because of his contributions. In 1830, he was appointed rector of the University of Berlin, and this was a great honor for Hegel. He wants a new philosophy and new political life for German nation. His method was historical, evolutionary, and dialectical. He wrote about religion, history, art, science, law, politics, and philosophy. There are different most important theories of Hegel which are most important place in the history of Western political thought. During this discussion, first of all, we examine about his most famous theory, the pattern of history, and that is a major contribution of Hegel. Hegel's distinctive contribution to political thought lies in large part in his philosophy of history. Hegel explains history in these words. He wrote that history is not a haphazard and disconnected series of events in a time. History has a pattern which Hegel calls the idea. He also considered history a purposeful. According to him, the world has a destiny toward which it has always moved. This destiny has been predetermined by the author of the idea, God. It is God's will that the world shall progress toward the fulfillment of its destiny. Reason is the history of man. Each period of history is understood in terms of the institutions, science, art, religion, and culture which develop within it. These sacrifices hardships, and conflicts that have been suffered have not been meaningless. They have been extended historical progress. Hegel emphasizes that each great event in history had contributed in its time to the development of mankind. A proper comprehension of the meaning of the idea can be achieved only through an understanding of the dialectic. The dialectic combines the methods of analysis in the study of history and makes possible a true understanding of history. Now we examine a core part, a most important and integrative part of the Hegel's theory, and that is the dialectic in history, or in other words, dialectical process in the history. While discussing about dialectical process in the history, Hegel explains at any given time in world history, the idea is represented by thesis, which is incomplete manifestation toward which the word spirit is moving. In time, the thesis gives rise to an other and contradictory idea or antithesis. Both may survive together, but because they stand in a relation of contradiction to one another, so they lead to conflict between them. In the conflict, neither thesis nor antithesis is completely destroyed. The result is the clash of contradictory ideas, is a fusion of the higher valid elements of both, and these elements can be considered valid elements which remained survive and invalid elements destructed during this process. The merging of the higher elements of thesis and antithesis forms a synthesis, which is an improvement over both of them, thesis and antithesis. So, the synthesis in turn represents a new thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So, the cycle continue in the dialectical process of history. Each cycle produces a higher stage in the history. Each synthesis is a victory for the word spirit, a movement of reason toward the ultimate historical goal. Each idea or thesis contains within itself the seeds of its own modification. In practical terms, since the idea is represented by people's culture, civilization, this means that no culture immune from the forces of change. That is very important part of Hegel's philosophy. Hegel further explains that progress is inherited in the process of history. For Hegel, conflict is the key to progress. It is inevitable. Each new synthesis containing the valid elements of both thesis and antithesis carries with it the truths of the past. Each new stage of history incorporates all the virtues and all the wisdom of the past stages. True progress consists of this synthesis. History is the story of its unfolding or development in the various stages, each of which represents an advance over its predecessors. Word history as a whole is a manifestation of the advancement of the idea. The truth of the present with which philosophy is concerned incorporates all the truths of the past. These truths have been unfolded stage by stage in the march of history. So, our today's discussion or our present discussion about Hegel's introduction, his contributions, his writings, his theory about philosophy of history, and his dialectical process of history. The remaining contributions of Hegel, the remaining theories of Hegel, inshallah, will be examined in next lecture. So that is the end of today's discussion.